May I call this meeting to order, and thank you very much, the ATT Secretariat, dear distinguished delegates, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Patrick. I'm standing in for the president of the CSP7 conference. Unfortunately, he conveys his deep regrets and apologies as he had to travel on a family emergency and could not be available for this meeting. With those remarks, we just want to welcome everyone and to thank everyone for participating. If it's possible, when you take the floor to speak, if you could just identify yourself by the country or organization you represent, and if also possible, you could indicate that on the name you use on this Zoom. That will be fine. But otherwise, we want to welcome you, and we want to start the discussion by just recapping on the President's working paper. We want to thank the Secretariat for sharing that working paper. It's the revised working paper. Now, this consultation follows the ATT preparatory meetings we held in April this year. We're happy to inform that we incorporated the suggestions, comments made from that meeting. We want to thank also, since we have issued the revised working paper, a number of delegations have provided us with written comments, and therefore we want to thank those delegations, including France, Japan, Switzerland, and the Women International League for Peace and Freedom. We thank you, we appreciate those comments. We will endeavor to incorporate as best as possible those comments, which a good number of them, well, all of them are very helpful. I want to take a few moments to just go onto the working paper itself, the revised working paper. I am not going to go through paragraph by paragraph for want of time, but then also more importantly, because we have been we have shared this, and we hope our delegations have had the opportunity to go through it, and so it will save us time. But just on the structure, we maintain the structure as the paper that was discussed in April. Therefore, the structure did not, we didn't change it. Introduction, addressing those illicit trade on small arms and light weapons within the ATT and across the wider spectrum of work being done within the UN, the AU, other regional bodies, and other international organizations. That's our third section in the paper. We then talked about strengthening the implementation mechanism on stockpile. That's the fourth. And the fifth segment of the paper is it's really the output. So the structure does not change. What about the content? On the content, the paper maintained most of what was presented in the April meeting, but the paper has two new additions that stand out clearly. One is we made a clearer and a better demonstration of the synergy between the President's working paper, his thematic focus, and the ATT's role in this work, as well as other instruments that we identified. So here we have a better illustration of other instruments. We cited those ones and referenced those ones. So at least we will all have a better appreciation of how this theme fits in with already existing mechanisms out there. And if you refer to the second segment addressing illicit trade, and you go to, I think it's page 3 or so, the few paragraphs just before that, we made a number of references to other instruments, including the Human Rights Council itself. So that's the first inclusion into the content of the paper. The second is that we, indeed, thanks to the discussions we had in April, highlighting gender issues into the work of the ATT board, in particular in relation to small arms and light weapons. We made reference to those as well. So that is reflected in the revised paper. So we're very pleased for all those delegations that contributed, made statements and observations in relation to the issues of gender and how gender is impacted by small arms and light weapons. So that's new in the paper. Now on the possible outputs. The possible outputs are broadly divided into two categories. If we look at them, they're broadly divided into two categories based on their intended audience and the expected impact. So the audience here is when we look at the first two proposed outputs, output 1 and output 2, they target a wider audience. We call this wider audience ATT stakeholders generally. So this is everyone who deals with small arms and light weapons across the globe. And so these first two possible outputs target that audience. And the essence of doing this is for us to have better coordination. And this ties in with the new, when we say we introduce better synergy, identifying more instruments that link up on the work, the theme of the president's paper. This output speaks to that, output 1 and output 2. So we can clearly see the synergy in on the president's theme and existing instrument. Therefore, when we say in output number 1, we're really looking for a better utilization of existing guidance and tools on preventing illicit trade. We know we're not reinventing the wheel. And this, in fact, it's better. Instead of duplicating, we are enhancing our understanding of small arms and light weapons, but the trade in particular, the illicit trade, how that trade operates. And so we call upon those existing guidance that are there, those tools, and we say, let us use these tools better in the ATT. That's what output 1 is calling for. Output 2 is on post-delivery cooperation. We are suggesting that ATT stakeholders, the wider audience out there, we start formal discussions, concerning post-delivery cooperation, and we should develop guidelines on cooperation and assistance to ensure ongoing compliance with export documentations and something like that. And output number 2 is related to output number 5. But albeit that with output number 1 and output number 2, our focus here is the wider community that deals with small arms and light weapons and stockpile management and security. Now, in relation to outputs 3, 4, and 5, these outputs, they are focused and they relate to the ATT in particular, the ATT and the working group on effective treaty implementation in particular. And therefore, what we are calling for, what we are proposing in output number 3 is about information sharing among ATT stake parties within the ATT. So better information sharing is what we're calling for, in particular on using the existing mechanisms within the ATT. For example, the ATT initial reporting templates, the use of plenary discussions like we usually have in conferences when we have the general debates. Now, these platforms can provide an opportunity for information sharing on how we can use innovative management programs. Output number 4 is about information sharing among ATT stake parties, but this is at national level. And so we're calling upon state parties to share those best practices they undertake in their jurisdictions to provide or highlight those mitigating measures in the context of Article 7.4. This is both in relation to preventing the illicit trade, but more so on stockpile security. We want to know how this can be done, in a more effective way. And the last output, this is about calling on the working group on effective treaty implementation for us to identify, for us to compile, and for us to make available to states who seek assistance a list of existing relevant bilateral and multilateral assistance programs within and outside the ATT, which we aim they will indeed address illicit trade in small arms and light weapon and stockpile management. So if you look at those, the last outputs and output number 2, they relate in the sense that we're talking about how to enhance cooperation, how to develop guidelines on cooperation and assistance. So we hope that these 5 proposed outputs, they reinforce each other, albeit that we've put them in 5 various outputs, but the essence is that we need to address small arms and light weapons and see how stockpile management could contribute to addressing the illicit trade. With those remarks, I want to stop there for now and open the floor for delegations to make comments, observations, and as I mentioned in the beginning, we indeed incorporated those comments we received during the April meetings. We're grateful for the delegations that have already given us written comments, and today we are happy to consider and listen to those comments, further comments you may want to present to enhance this paper, as this paper is the ATT's paper, it's our paper. And so we want to thank you for attending, and let me stop there and open the floor. You may raise your hand or put in the chat a request for you to speak. Thank you. Mr. Dumisani Dlala, please help us if there is any request on the floor, on the chat, just in case.
Well, no one at present, but we are monitoring the chat, but at present there's no one who's requesting the floor.
Okay. I think, yes, I can see requests coming up now.
There's the UK, Ireland.
Okay, so the UK, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for convening this meeting. Thanks also for your clarifications and explanation about the draft text that you're proposing us. I just have a couple of additional questions. One relates in particular to recommendation number 2, where the draft talks about formalizing discussions concerning post-delivery cooperation experiences. And I wondered whether you could elaborate a little bit further on what formalizing these discussions may mean in practice. Then, with regards to recommendation number 3 and recommendation number 4, we feel that perhaps it would be more appropriate to insert a caveat, in particular, as regards to recommendation number 3, there are some circumstances and instances where it may not be appropriate to, for example, I'm sorry, I don't have the text right in front, sorry, to provide information or to share information. And so we would like to add as appropriate into the text. So in recommendation number 3, the text would read, should share as appropriate information on effective and innovative stockpile management programs. With regards to recommendation number 4, the reason is very similar. And so we suggest inserting as appropriate into the text. So the text would read, should provide information as appropriate on their national practices. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let me take other comments and then we could try and respond to them. Now I see Ireland, you have the floor, to be followed by Korea, please.
Mr. Chair, thank you very much for giving me the floor and allow me to pass on our warm wishes to the presidency as well. At the outset, I'd like to commend you for ensuring the vital work of the ATT can continue in an accessible and transparent manner, despite the challenges posed by the public health situation. I'd like to congratulate you for the hard work undertaken and to offer you Ireland's continued cooperation and support. I'd like to thank you also for the revision of the draft working paper. Ireland, as one of the first countries to sign and ratify the Arms Trade Treaty, has been a strong and consistent supporter of the treaty since its inception. We regard the ATT as a vital instrument in the global community's efforts towards regulating the trade in conventional arms, ammunition, and eliminating illegal arms transfers. Our shared goal is a safer and more secure world, as envisaged in the ambitious 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development. And my comments have just collapsed. One sec. There we go. Your working paper highlights the necessity of urgent action to combat illicit diversion and sets out a clear path for how the AT can tackle the issues. We welcome the call in the paper to explore the strong synergies which exist between the ATT and other initiatives to combat diversion, and we fully support the proposed mapping exercises to identify gaps and improve coherence and implementation. We thank you, Mr. President, for reflecting the proposals made by Ireland and the European Union on the issues of gender in the latest draft. These are critical issues and necessary to demonstrate the state parties are committed to the full implementation of the decisions taken at the 5th Conference of State Parties. We also welcome the additional references in your working paper to the report of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights on the gendered impact of diverted and illicitly trafficked arms in the human rights of women and girls. In order for us to address armed violence and weapons diversion in all forms, it is necessary to acknowledge the differentiated gendered impact of these issues, patterns of violence, and tailor appropriate policy measures accordingly. These additional elements significantly strengthen your paper and resonate with the object and purpose of the treaty. Should the suggested outputs from the paper be agreed by state parties, we feel this would have a significant positive impact on treaty implementation, and we support them as proposed. I look forward to continuing working with you and all state parties on this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ireland. May we now have Korea to be followed. I think we saw the hand of Mr. Arthur Duforest, but I'm not sure if he wants to take the floor. But let's have Korea, please, Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for convening this consultation, which is precious in the times of COVID-19 pandemic. I'm grateful that your paper, that the President's paper has been updated mainly on the linkage between the illicit trade in small arms and light weapons and the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals and the impact on gender-based violence. We generally support the President's ideas. The Republic of Korea believes that recommendations in the President's working paper are supposed to be incorporated into the current or coming work plans of the sub-working groups of effective treaty implementation with its adoption at CSP7. Therefore, the recommendations must be realistic and be building on the current sub-working works. We believe that second recommendation, I would say, and literally in the paper possible output, which is to have formal discussions on post-delivery cooperation experiences from both exporter and importer and develop guidelines on cooperation and assistance for compliance with export documentation is relevant and can be explored in the coming sub-workities. For the fourth output, which is a new recommendation by the President, the Republic of Korea is of the view that the discussion on the national practices regarding mitigating measures in Article 4.7 does not have to be with particular focus on small arms and light weapons or stockpile management, even though we believe that the mitigating measures in the context of Article 7.4 are entitled for further discussions since they were not fully discussed during CSP6, in part due to COVID-19 and the change of working method. Lastly, for the fifth recommendation, the Republic of Korea believes that states parties in general are better placed for consideration of identification and compilation of a list of assistance programs within and outside the ATT for addressing the illicit trade of small arms and light weapons and stockpile management than WGT, since we cannot identify directly which subgroups of the current WGT can deal with the subject. I will submit the written inputs on the President's working paper after today's consultations. Thank you. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Republic of Korea. Let us take Japan and then we'll do some quick response and take others. Japan, you have the floor, please.
Hello, thank you very much, Patrick. Japan, appreciate, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, yes,
okay.
yes.
Japan appreciate your dedication to advance the discussion on these important issues, and thank you for your preparation for revised version of the working paper for the upcoming CSP. We see that this paper includes many important elements which Japan sees values. I would like to share our comments on two points in this paper, which Japan has submitted in a writing through the Secretariat last week. Firstly, Japan welcomes the additional references of the UNGA resolution on the illicit trade in small arms and light weapons in all its aspects in this paper, which Japan jointly submitted with Colombia and South Africa to the UNGA last year and adopted by the consensus. And secondly, in the section of the possible output from the CSP7, Japan believes that the possible outputs 1 to 5 in page 5 and 6 you proposed by the CSP7 president for the areas considered for the extension or longer term implementations. In this regard, we believe that it is not appropriate to use the term should within those sentences and request that this term should be deleted from each sentence. We would like to highly appreciate your kind considerations to reflect our comments in the final version. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Japan. Just a few comments based on those contributions from those the distinguished delegations. We want to thank you all. And for those who have indicated they will be providing us with written comments, we appreciate that. We want to extend that same request to the United Kingdom. If you could also share with us, and Ireland, share with us your written comments, that would be really appreciated. Now, the UK asked how the output number 2 could be realized. How could it be operationalized? Output number 2 calls for ATT stakeholders to formalize discussions concerning post-delivery cooperation, experience from both exporter and importer perspective, and should consider developing guidelines on cooperation and assistance to ensure ongoing compliance with export documentation, including authorized end use. What we have in mind here are a number of things, but one of those would be to utilize the existing ATT institutions, the existing ATT organs, like we know in CSP4, CSP5, decisions were made, recommendations were made from the Effective Treaty Implementation Working Group, wherein guidelines were set as to how states could undertake export-import transactions and how to address the possibility of diversion. So we have this in mind that when once formal discussions start, the theme or the focus would be on how to ensure that exporters and importers states are able to better cooperate with each other And indeed, the aim we have here is that with those guidelines, states would have a template to follow as to how they go about doing that. But at this stage, it would require further work, and that further work, hopefully, when conference adopts this, conference will be in a better position to identify which of the existing working groups should be charged with such responsibility in working with state parties to address this issue. So those are some of the initial thoughts we have about output number 2. In relation to the Republic of Korea's comment on outputs number 2 and number 4, we appreciate those. The Republic of Korea also suggested that state parties are better placed than the working group on effective treaty implementation. We've noted those comments, and we will take appropriate action when we revise the paper for its final version that will be considered by conference. With those remarks, let me turn to the chat or the floor to see if there is any request for the floor. I can see China. China has requested the floor. China, you have the floor, please.
Can you hear me? Hello, I'm
yes,
not.
I can hear you. I
Okay,
can hear you.
I'm
Thank
sorry.
you.
I want to.
No, I can hear you now. Yes,
okay,
thank you.
okay, yeah. So I will use Chinese.
Yes, that's fine. Interpretation is available.
中方非常感谢主席您召开今天的非正式磋商。我们赞赏主席就打击轻小武器非法贸易和加强库存管理提出工作文件。也非常感谢您刚才所做的详细介绍。国内正在对有关文件进行研究，特别是征求有关部门的意见。中方代表团今天参加的会议，也认真听取了各方的发言。我们将把今天的意见和有关国家提供的书面意见一同报回国内，供国内做出决定参考。如果中方有关部门提出进一步意见，我们将向您尽快反馈。中方根据上一轮非正式磋商的情况，已经就其他问题反馈了意见。我们将认真听取本次非正式磋商中的各方意见，一并反馈国内后，再向工作组主席反馈。谢谢。
We thank the distinguished delegates from China. I can see from the floor, forgive me if I didn't get a title, but I can see Arthur DeForest. You have the floor, please.
Yes, thank you. Can you guys hear me?
Sorry. I think you're muted.
Am I connected? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. Yes.
Fantastic. Hello. Instead of a short sentence, I would rather ask a rather straightforward question that relates to the cooperation and assistance, which you mentioned earlier. So since cooperation assistance seems to be the cornerstone of the ATT Secretariat and the CSP7's approach, I was wondering how how do you plan to interact with parliamentarians and parliaments of the countries that have not yet ratified the treaty? And the reason why I'm asking that is because to me, it really seems like those would be the key stakeholders to interact with in order to progress the mission of the ATT. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's see if there are any other requests for the floor. I see none, so let me just use the opportunity to respond if it is. Yes, indeed, the parliaments of the various states do play a role in the ratification of the treaty, accession, or whatever process they have in their own domestic jurisdiction. What we hope is that from the guidance that will be developed on cooperation and development assistance, either at bilateral level or multilateral level, we hope that that guidance will also identify potential stakeholders who can contribute to that process. But this is something that I think will happen during the development of those guidelines, which we hope it will be a very consultative process, an inclusive process, as the ATT always does. And so when one of the working groups, and in particular in this case, when we talk about developing those guidelines, we mentioned the working group on effective treaty implementation, where if this is adopted and the working group is tasked with that responsibility, I'm sure they will find the opportunity to engage with all stakeholders in developing the guidelines and identifying who should participate in this process. And indeed, the Interparliamentary Union would certainly be a relevant stakeholder. And we know that, in fact, on a bilateral level between the presidency and the IPU, we're engaged in working on a few programs, and that is the kind of engagement we hope that will be formalized once these recommendations are adopted. I hope that gives you some response, but hopefully we can explore this either at a bilateral level or probably in conference itself. But thank you very much for the question, Mr. Arthur De Forest. I open the floor for more comments and questions from the distinguished delegates that are here. Any other requests for the floor? I can see the hand of Ibon Gui Christine. I cannot see the last name because the hand is up, but you have the floor, please. And apologies, I cannot see the title. You have the floor.
Hello?
Yes.
Hello? Do you receive me?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay.
Please carry on.
Bon, ma question, elle est par rapport à l'échange de bonnes pratiques. Comment pensez-vous qu'on puisse implémenter la recommandation sur le partage de bonnes pratiques? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. I'm sure we have a number of opportunities to share best practices, and that can be done through the structures we have within the ATT, for example, on those initial reporting templates, meetings, various meetings, informal meetings like these, or conference. The ultimate way also of sharing best practices is when we embed these in guidelines and tools that are developed by the various organs of the ATT. So we hope that when some or all of these recommendations are adopted and they are implemented, the various bodies, like in this case, the Working Group on Effective Treaty Implementation, could produce the relevant guidelines on best practices, or when we meet in conferences, sharing those best practices, or when we use the reporting templates. Thank you very much. Any other request for the floor?
Patrick, I see no one from my side.
Okay. Well, let's just give it 1 minute or two, and if we hear no further requests, then we'll see how we can wrap up the discussion. But I open the floor again if delegations would like to take the floor on the revised working paper of the presidency. I can see Roy Ibista. Please, you have the floor, Roy.
Thank you, Patrick. It's just a question, really. I think right at the beginning, if my notes are correct, you mentioned that you received written comments from, it was from France, Japan, Switzerland, and Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. I think we've had Japan has spoken and said what their comments were. I'm just wondering if either someone from France or Switzerland or WILF could speak to the content of their written submissions, or if they're not available, if possibly, if you could summarize them. That's all. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. So we have, I don't know if we have Japan. Japan has already given us theirs. France, Switzerland, and Women's League International for Peace. Do we have any of these delegations?
Patrick?
Yes, please.
We have France, Stephanie, as well as Switzerland, and Remitman after that.
So we have women's, is that on, who takes the floor first? Who's request? France? Okay, sorry, France, you have the floor, please.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président. Merci beaucoup de me donner la parole. Je voulais simplement effectivement rappeler les commentaires écrits qui ont été transmis par la France. Pour l'essentiel, comme vous le savez, la France tenait d'abord à vous remercier pour ce document que nous trouvons excellent. Nous partageons pleinement les options et les recommandations qui y sont formulées, et nous sommes également en plein soutien de la priorité que vous avez souhaité donner pour l'organisation de cette 7e des conférences des États parties, car la France, comme vous le savez également, est très engagée dans la prévention et la lutte contre le détournement. Nous attachons une importance particulière à la prévention et à la lutte contre les trafics d'armes, notamment les trafics d'armes légères et de petit calibre, ainsi qu'à la problématique de la gestion des stocks, que nous estimons en complète cohérence et pertinence avec les objectifs et les buts du traité. Dans le cadre des commentaires que nous avons transmis au secrétariat, nous avons simplement indiqué que nous souhaiterions obtenir des précisions sur les recommandations numéro 3 et 4, plus particulièrement sur la faisabilité et sur les modalités concrètes de mise en œuvre de la recommandation numéro 4. Et nous avons également proposé de remplacer le terme « should » s'agissant de l'échange d'informations par « are encouraged to », non pas par opposition de principe à cet échange et ce partage d'informations, notamment sur les modalités concrètes mises en œuvre en termes de gestion des stocks, mais pour être plus précis sur la possibilité du partage de ces informations. En ce sens, notre commentaire rejoint partiellement celui qui a été fait par le Royaume-Uni qui est intervenu avant moi. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Franz. Switzerland, you have the floor, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Patrick and Dumisani, for giving me the floor. Thank you, Roy, for your question. I can keep our answer short. We actually had no specific comments on the paper. We just mentioned that we have no objection and that we can support the paper in its entirety. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Switzerland. I think we have Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. I think you requested the floor. Yes, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I will also just briefly mention what we addressed in our paper. Thanks for the question, Roy. So we also just welcomed a lot of the different sections of the paper, including the efforts to identify and act on the synergies that you mentioned. And in that respect, we suggested 2 UN Security Council resolutions on small arms and light weapons that might also be referenced in the section on the different instruments. And similar to Ireland, we also very much welcome the multiple references to relevant reports, decisions, and resolutions that describe in various ways the gendered impact of arms, including those diverted from stockpiles. And in our submission, we suggest that other Human Rights Council resolutions could be mentioned that also speak to the link between the impact of arms transfers on the human rights of women and girls, because in the report, in the paper as it stands now, there only mentioned a couple of human rights resolutions, but it's very minor. So we're really happy with the paper and mostly just welcomed it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. Do we have any other requests for the floor?
Patrick, from my side, I can't see any other request for the floor.
Okay.
I assume that Stephanie from France has just forgotten to remove the hand.
Yeah, I think so. Okay, I think so. I think she's lowered it now. Okay. Well, if there are no more requests for the floor, we want to take this opportunity to thank everyone, all delegations, representative of international organizations that are with us here. We appreciate the time you have given to discussing this paper, and we note the elements that have been suggested in the written submissions and those that have been made orally today, especially by those delegations, the UK, Ireland, the Republic of Korea, Japan I've mentioned, and we just want to thank you all, Switzerland, France, thank you for the comments. We will endeavor to revise the paper as we indicated earlier on and see how we can reflect those comments that tie in with the paper, that enhances the paper. And so with that, those comments, I think in the absence of any other request for the floor, I would want to bring this meeting to a close and hope that we will share the revised paper ready for translation, circulation, and for consideration at CSP7. I want to thank you very much on behalf of the president, and once more, he regrets not being here and conveys his apologies for that. But we thank you for your time and we thank you for your contribution to this paper. We hope that we will all adopt this paper come CSP7 and find a way of enhancing our collective efforts in addressing the illicit trade in small arms and light weapons, as well as stockpile management and security. With those comments, I close the meeting and thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the week. Thank you.